We are back. A little talking ball in the zone. We got a full house. George Case is here. George Case, how are you, sir?
I'm just fine, thank you.
Alan Blumkin.
I'm here.
Hal Bock.
I'm good.
And David Hubler is going to lead the discussion. Comfortably Zoned Network. I'm Ralph Tycho. You guys have a terrific one. David Hubler.
Okay, thanks, Ralph. You know, over the last couple of weeks, we've sort of talked mostly baseball, and I realized that perhaps we didn't give enough attention to the women's soccer team, their wonderful win in France, again, World Cup champions. But what I really was interested in looking at it, because there's this controversy now going on about, you know, they should be paid equally to the men, which I certainly agree to that. But I'm just wondering, I think Hal and George probably might have a better handle on it than I do. But these international organizations, I mean, I know going back to Avery Brundage in the Olympic Committee, these people ran these organizations like their own personal little fiefdoms, and it's amazing how they continue to perpetuate themselves and their organizations, including the NCAA. I know people have tried to just get answers from them, calling the headquarters, and they're given a real runaround instead of being willing to talk about what's going on. The same thing is true now, of course, with the Soccer Federation. So I'm just wondering, what's with these organizations? How do you feel about them? Do you know much about them?
There's a lot of history here, David, and it goes back to the earliest days of these sports. And the AAU, for example, the Amateur Athletic Union, had an ongoing battle with the NCAA for many, many years, back in the 40s and 30s, and who was going to control amateur sports in the United States. And it was always a big to-do about athletes getting paid in the Olympics, for example. Now, if you win an Olympic gold medal, you get a huge payday from USOC, the United States Olympic Committee, and that's the way it should be. I mean, these organizations are getting tons of money from television rights, and they expect the athletes to perform for nothing. Well, that's not fair. And so, as I said, there's a lot of history here, and it goes back to the days of the Amateur Athletic Union and the earliest days of the NCAA and Walter Byers. But they're coming around, and I think, and George might have a good feel for this, I think we're coming to the time when college athletes are going to be paid. The basketball players and the football players, the revenue-producing sports, who put a lot of money in the university pockets and get tuition books and board, which amounts to very little in terms of their ability to live day to day. For example, we had the example during the NCAA tournament a couple of years ago. One of the UConn players said he goes to bed hungry frequently because he doesn't have money for food. Well, how can you have that? How can you have one of your star players not have enough money for food? It's ridiculous. So that's the history of it goes back many, many years to the AAU days. George, I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Well, you know what, Hal? I happen to agree with you about the athletes being paid. I think at some point that's what's going to happen. I think it's going to be at that Division I level and probably basketball and football because they're the two, so-called revenue sports that generate the most amount of income. And, the baseball and soccer and, we're talking about women's soccer, but they're basically non-revenue sports. They just don't make a lot of money because they don't have huge attendance or scholarships available. So I think at some point, basketball, college basketball, probably Division I, and college basketball and college football, at some point the athletes are going to be paid, and they're going to be paid up front rather than, under the table. A lot of the athletes are being paid under the table by, sponsors, by
boosters,
alumni, by wealthy people that are looking for influence, naming rights, and all that kind of stuff, and money gets given to the athletes. I know for a fact, and I'm not naming names, but you go to some of these college campuses, and here's an athlete who might not be going to class at all, other than going to study halls and tutors and stuff, but he's driving around in a fancy sports car. Well, where do you think that sports car came from? And that's what they do. So I agree with you, Hal. I think at some point that's going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen in Division II or Division III or the smaller colleges because they're not generating that kind of interest. But when you look at the World Cup and what the women are making, they weren't making it as college women's soccer players, I can tell you that for a fact, but they're sure going to be making it, because of what they did at the World Cup.
Yeah, well, you can also add in the women's WBA as a fairly new professional sports operation. What I'm curious about is how do some of these people who really we do have the stars who wind up in heading organizations, but for the most part, go back to Avery Brundage. This man was no athlete. How did he wind up being so powerful in this organization and so domineering in everything that the Olympic Committee had to do? And we've had other people like that. I remember Ned Irish at the old Madison Square Garden. He controlled a lot of activities along the East Coast there with especially in basketball. But you just wonder how do these non-athletes suddenly have a career where they're in charge of multi-million-dollar athletes?
Well, that's a very good question, David. I don't. Yeah, I don't have the answer myself. I have no idea. It's sort of like you think it because it's there, but where they came from, how they did it, and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
They're in a world of their own, great power, and it's not only the United States. Look at the foreign countries. The head of the soccer organization, or the head of the World Wrestling Federation, or the head of the World Basketball Federation, whatever they call it. These guys are very powerful in their countries and very powerful in their various Olympic or national committees. So how they got those jobs, where they came from, I really have absolutely no idea. It's a very good question, and maybe Hal or Alan or you know. I don't. I'm just accepting the fact that these guys, you mentioned Avery Brundage. All of us who remember the Olympics remember the name Avery Brundage. But what his background is, I really don't know.
They fill vacuums. There's a leadership vacuum. Any organization that has a leadership vacuum will find people to fill it. Brundage was excuse my French, he was a damn Nazi. He was the one who wouldn't let Marty Glickman and the other runner, whose name escapes me, from back in those times, run in the Hitler Olympics in
1936 Olympics, right.
And then, of course, when it came to the massacre of the Israeli athletes in 1972, he just waved it off like it never happened.
Yeah, that's very true.
Got in the way of the games for a couple of days.
A lot of it is politics.
Yeah, oh yeah.
I know the story of Ned Irish. Ned Irish was a sports writer here in New York, and he went to the Garden to cover some games, some basketball, and it occurred to him that this was a sleeping giant. And he went to the Garden and he asked if he could promote a basketball game. And the Garden had no money. This was in the middle of the Depression. And they said, sure, go ahead. And he did. And it took off like a rocket. And the next thing you know, Ned Irish is working for Madison Square Garden, eventually becoming the president of Madison Square Garden. So, it's one of those things. I can't explain it to you, but that's the way it happened. But it's a lot of it is politics, David.
Yeah.
I'm sure that Brundage had some political pull that got him into that spot, and he held on to it for 25, 30 years. So, it's unfortunate. But I think, without question, that the women's soccer team is going to reap the benefits. I'm sure they're going to have equality with the men, because it's a scandal if they don't. After all, the men didn't even make the World Cup tournament, the last World Cup tournament.
Right.
And the women won the World Cup. So the Soccer Federation is going to have to come around. There was an indication that it would. During the ticker tape parade here in New York, the president of the Soccer Federation got up there to speak, and he made it clear, I mean, not in so many words, but he made it clear that they were going to do something for the women to level the playing field. So you can look for that to happen.
Yeah, in tennis, men and women get paid equally for the major tournaments, but the women still play 3 sets and the men still play 5. But it wasn't until 1968 that the pros, professional tennis players, who were in the twilight zone somewhere for all the years before that, were allowed to participate in these in what they call the Grand Slam tournaments now, which to me was ridiculous.
Yeah, there's really no such thing as amateur.
No.
At that level,
it's always been a fiction, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, that they do it for the purity of the sport and the goodness of their heart.
Yeah,
that's all nonsense.
That went out with the long sleeves.
Perpetrated by promoters to keep the cost down.
Yeah. Well, all that stuff went out with the long pants and the white duck pants on the tennis courts.
Now, Net Irish started in the Gardeners, like Hal mentioned, by promoting college basketball doubleheaders, because the pro basketball was at that time really didn't exist very much.
No.
And then
I always thought that when the NIT, the National Invitation Tournament, I always thought that was really basically based on his initials more than anything else.
Yeah.
The Net Irish Tournament.
Yeah. And for a long time it was more important than the NCAA.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And it's always held at the Garden, right? I mean, the NCAA, moves from site to site, but
not anymore. Not anymore.
Does that move?
They bring the last. When it gets down to 4, they bring it into the Garden.
Yeah, they now play all over.
The preliminary games are all over the place, but now, since the NCAA consists of 68 teams, you count the teams that are in the playing games. The NIT is left with the
dregs.
Leftovers.
Yeah.
Now,
and
Alan and David and Hal, I'm curious when you mentioned that. How are the teams for the NIT selected? I know how the NCAA selects.
Basically, after the NCAA does its picks,
the
NIT gets what's left over. You'll get certain teams that were on the bubble for the NCAA that didn't make it. There's sometimes those teams are fed up totally, and they say, "Well, they picked us for the NIT. We're tired of playing. We just want to lose and get out of here."
It's sort of an afterthought that
pitted a couple of times.
Yeah.
But they also try to get a local team in.
ESPN,
try to get a New York metropolitan team into the NIT just for gate purposes. Any team that if they win 20 games and they're recognized as a pretty good team, they'll be in the NIT if they're not in the NCAA. Just to make sure that they have a local representative.
Now, I remember, if I'm not mistaken, that under NCAA rules, if you are given a bid, you have to take it. You can't simply just say, no, I want to go to the NIT. Years ago, remember St. John's? St. John's went to the NIT over, choosing over the NCAA.
Well,
a number of times.
Who did that? Marquette. Al McGuire, who was a New York guy, refused the NCAA bid and took his Marquette team to the NIT.
And Joe Lapchick did the same thing.
Yeah, but in those days,
the NIT had a much higher profile than
yes,
it does
did.
today.
In those days, though, the major conferences, most of the major conferences, would not let their runner-up teams go to the NIT. So the NIT was basically consisted of teams that had no conference affiliation, and what's now the Big East, what became the Big East, back in those days had no conference affiliation, so they could go. But I remember specifically an ACC title game between Maryland and North Carolina State, when North Carolina State won 103-100. It was one of the greatest college games of all time. North Carolina State went to the NCAA. Maryland went home because the ACC would not allow the runner-up team to go to the NIT.
Was that because of segregation rules? I know at one
point... No,
it's
just
the Southern schools...
Policies. It's just policy.
No.
The Big Ten, only the schools like the Missouri Valley or some of these minor conferences will allow their runner-ups to go to the NIT.
Keep in mind, too, that some of these smaller schools, it's a big expense, too.
And this is when the NCAA had 25 teams. Until 1976, they had 25 teams in the tournament. So
they had fewer than it. They had fewer in the early 60s. They had 16 teams.
Yes, 2016, 25 teams.
No, they've been expanding it over the years.
Oh, now it's 68.
Yeah, I know.
Went to 32 in 1976, which was really the first year that conferences will allow their runner-ups to go into the NCAA tournament. They went from 32 to 48 to 64. And when they started this playing nonsense,
they
made it 68.
Yeah, well, it's big money. It's big money.
Of course, it's huge money.
Yeah.
Now, do you guys know at what level do the schools start? Do they get money from the NCAA just by qualifying for the tournament? I mean, I really don't know. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, I think they do. And the more they win, the more they get.
But
yeah,
also
that's probably
the conference gets money.
Right.
The school conferences get a piece of cash as well if their teams get into the tournament. That's why it's a big competition to see if among the conferences to see how many teams qualify for the NCAA, because the conference gets paid too.
You usually take a 7th place team or an 8th place team from the ACC before you would take a 2nd place team from a mid-major.
Yeah, well, of course.
Yeah, there's always a talk, between the ACC and the Big Ten, the number of teams that they get in the tournament. And like you're saying, Alan, then the mid-majors, they're almost second thought about it. But occasionally, a mid-major will get right up there. And, will reap the rewards of the tournament because of the upsets. And, normally you're looking at the NCAA, the Final Four. There's usually 4 major basketball schools. But on occasion, whether it be a Butler or Xavier or whoever it is, I mean, they'll make the tournament and get very far into the tournament.
But they'll take
one of the unwritten rules of the tournament, we have God knows how many conferences now in the United States, many small conferences. If you win your conference tournament, you qualify for the NCAA, but you'll be the only team from your conference to go to the NCAA.
Yeah. Right.
Alan was saying the 7th place team from the ACC will probably get in because they're a quality team and they're behind 6 other quality teams. But in the smaller conferences, they just take the champion of the conference, of the playoff.
And they're not usually a big draw at all, unless they become a Cinderella team. Like
well, that's the thing, David. That's what I was mentioning. You get a team like a Bucknell or a Colgate or some of these, very, very prestigious schools academically, but not really known as basketball powers. Occasionally, they'll surprise and they will be a Cinderella team.
They'd rather bring in an Ohio State with a 19-13 regular season record than one of these mid-majors or lesser schools that have lost a couple of games.
Yeah, and it's not only the quality of the team; it's also the fans. I mean, there are a lot of graduates of Ohio State, Penn State, especially going into the Madison Square Garden area. They follow the teams, and they'll drive 400, 500 miles to buy tickets to see the games. Whereas some of the smaller schools, their fan base isn't that large. They'd love to go. Sometimes they do, but doesn't have the same impact as, say, a Penn State or a Maryland playing in the Garden, something like that, where there's a lot of alumni.
Well, there's one year, I think it was 1979, where in the Eastern region, Duke and North Carolina got knocked out and the regional final. It was played somewhere in North Carolina. The regional final was between, St. John's and Penn. There was nobody there.
Well, Penn traditionally was not
back in the day, before Syracuse and Pitt and Connecticut left the Big East. The Big East tournament in Madison Square Garden was a sellout for every day because they had all essentially local teams.
Mm-hmm.
Teams where the fan base could travel to Madison Square Garden. The fans could spend a couple of days in New York City, maybe see a show and so forth, and they would come for the basketball. And then Syracuse went to the ACC, and Pitt went to the ACC, and UConn went, I don't know where, but now they're back. They cleverly came back to the Big East. But the Big East tournament is not nearly the attraction at Madison Square Garden that it used to be.
Well, the Big East broke up because of football. The Big East broke up because of football.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
But, nevertheless, I'm talking about the attraction of those teams in basketball to
I used to go
site.
every year. I went every year.
Wait, let him finish.
I'm sorry.
So the attraction of those teams to come to the Garden, to see your team in the Garden, and you easily travel from UConn or from Pitt or from, obviously St. John's or Syracuse. It was a great, it was a week to remember. It was a crazy time. And then when these teams bailed and they were replaced by essentially Midwestern teams, the tournament lost a lot of its luster. And also the fact that St. John's has fallen on hard times, and they haven't been in the in the running for really a top-notch berth. So the Big East tournament is not nearly the attraction at Madison Square Garden that it used to be, and a lot of that is due to Syracuse and Pitt bailing out. And Alan is right; it was football. Football wags the tail, and basketball jumps. Unfortunately.
Yeah, I went to Pitt. I went to the Big East tournament, the whole thing. I should take off from work. I went to the whole thing for a lot of years. And Syracuse would take over.
House, right, Alan?
Syracuse would take over that hotel across the street. I think it's the Hotel Pennsylvania. That hotel's changed more names more than the cheap claiming course.
I think it's a Marriott now.
Whatever it is. And Syracuse would take it over. But you knew if Syracuse got knocked out early or St. John's got knocked out early, there'd be plenty of tickets available. Because those fans were not interested in seeing the tournament. They were interested in following the school. After school was knocked out early, they would sell the tickets in front of the Garden. Now, Pitt was never really a basketball power until, for a few years under Jamie Dixon. But they would get knocked out in the playing game, the first round. But I still kept going because the basketball quality was very, very high.
There was a time when the Big East was the best conference in America.
Yeah.
Even better than the ACC. But that time has passed. We don't have that anymore.
Exactly.
No, it's a shame too, because I've always enjoyed ACC basketball. It was real, and then one of the excuses for sort of breaking it up was, well, they played so hard in the ACC tournament that they go into the national tournament and they they'd fall apart because they just didn't have any more have the stamina to continue.
What always irked me was that when the NCAA tournament came around and the regional sites were chosen, somehow Duke and North Carolina would wind up in Greensboro or Charlotte or someplace like that, 50 miles from home, and other teams are traveling 300, 400, 500 miles. That's not right. I have a lot of trouble with that.
That just might be a coincidence, Hal.
Also, for years, the ACC and maybe the old Southern Conference were the only conferences that had conference tournaments.
Yeah, well, the ACC tournament was very, very popular.
Now
it was very important for those schools.
They all have conference tournaments now.
Yep, they all do.
Because they make a lot of money off them.
It's all a money game, sure.
Well, I remember when Syracuse won the national championship in 2003, the first two rounds that they played were in Boston and in Albany. Well, you're going to be packed with Syracuse fans that close to home, and then, of course, they went to New Orleans and won the whole thing. But, there's something wrong with that. I have a real problem with that, with the
Kentucky used to get
sense of geography.
Yeah, Kentucky used to get breaks all the time.
Yeah, the same thing.
Yeah, they were Louisville. They put Louisville.
Those storied basketball schools, that's what they do. They get the break on the location of the regionals or whatever. I mean, that's why you sometimes you'll look at the Final Four and you'll see the West champion. Who knows? I mean, that West champion might have been from Texas, or from New York City.
Yeah, you're right.
Wherever they put them, it doesn't have anything to do with where they're from. It's the amount of money, or what you're saying, Hal.
Geography is not their best suit. I'll tell you that.
Right. No, I'm with you on that. Absolutely. Yep.
Well, I think 68 teams is about as many as you can really carry and make this thing look legitimate. I think because even now at 68 teams, you've got a number of teams there that really don't belong in that tournament, and these are the ones that get knocked out in the first round. So they take these kids and they take them all the way halfway across the country, whatever, to play one game and lose, and then they're back home. I don't know. I think a smaller, of course, it's the money. It's always the money. But a smaller group of teams would make for a better tournament.
Yeah, 1 year Pitt made it, and they shipped them out for a regional in Idaho, in Boise, Idaho, in the afternoon game. Of course, they didn't exactly welcome that, and they got clobbered.
We're talking a lot of hoops here, and, of course, the basketball season is ways off. But we would be remiss if we didn't discuss one of the most remarkable baseball games that I can ever remember. And this took place in Anaheim the other night when the California Angels, or whatever they call themselves these days, remembered the memory of Tyler Skaggs, a pitcher. Pitcher died on a road trip. One of the horrible things, you check into a hotel room and he died, and nobody knows what the cause was. But the team decided to honor his memory on their first game back from that road trip, and they played it in California the other night. And all the players wore his uniform number and name on their back. Skaggs, right? 45 Skaggs.
Yep.
All of them. And they went out and they played a game, and they won the game 13-0. It was a no-hitter. They threw a no-hitter on the night that they saluted his memory. His mother threw out the first pitch. I mean, it was kind of stuff for fairy tales. It's not. You can't bring that kind of a story to Hollywood, And then after the game, all the players took their jerseys off and put them on the mound where he once worked for them. And I mean, if that didn't bring a tear to your eye, nothing would. A 27-year-old kid. And by the way, the game was played on the eve of what would have been his 28th birthday.
Right.
And you know how many batters? The Angels pitchers retired in that game? 28. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that came out of that game that's mystifying, and
it's reminiscent of the old Kennedy stories. You know, Kennedy's vice president was this, Lincoln's vice president was Johnson. Those kind of strange coincidences.
Same kind of thing, yeah.
But you know how
I don't really see that in baseball. You know, the game is played day in and day out. Oh, by the way, I must also add, since we're discussing baseball, I must also add something about the day after the Skaggs game, when the Angels had this no-hitter. The Baltimore Orioles went into the ninth inning of the game against, I think, Texas.
Yeah, that's just what I was going to mention. Yep.
They were being it was a perfect game.
It was a perfect game,
inning, right? Or 1 out in the ninth
inning.
But
even before that, even before. I know.
David, you know the story. Go ahead.
Even before that, their starting pitcher is pitching a perfect game, and they took him out. There was the score was 4-0, and they took him out. They were in the seventh. I think that it's unbelievable. I don't root for the Orioles, and I feel sorry for them. But I mean, they were winning that game, and how can you do that? How can you
have to get with the program? It's the new baseball, and in the new baseball, we shift. We play three players on one side of the second base, and then what happens?
Tampa Bay almost
with a perfect game. With a perfect game on the line, the batter hits against the shift, hits the ball into left field for a base hit, and breaks up the perfect game.
Yeah, and they even scored.
The new baseball, the new
Tampa Bay
baseball. Give me a break.
I know. I was so angry. I mean, you would have thought I was a rabid Orioles fan, but I
know.
How in the world can you? I mean, it's one thing, you know, if it's just even a no-hitter, you wouldn't want to do this. But a perfect game, and they pull them out of the, you know, and the Orioles are going nowhere. I mean, it's not like it's going to move them up in the standings or anything. They're terrible. And the chance for a perfect game. You remember when what's his name was pitching, and the ball went through. You know, he broke up the no-hitter, and there was a big hue and cry because the umpire had made the wrong call.
They call it first base.
Yeah, right. They call it first. But this was so blatant to have the manager, this young manager, come out and pull the starting pitcher on a perfect game.
Must have been told the pitch count was such that he had to take him out.
Right there. You know, you got to get with the program, David. It's modern baseball. And the pitch count rules the day. And never mind Warren Spahn and Juan Marichal throwing 250 pitches in one game. Mm-hmm. Never mind that. It's modern baseball. We have to protect those pitches. And so as a result, you got the games that you got now, and it's not the game that George and I fell in love with.
Right. Tampa Bay almost had the first combined perfect game in the history of baseball.
Yeah,
that's right.
And with and the game that Hal mentioned, the Skaggs game, they used an opener. The Angels pitched 2 innings of no-hit ball. Then they put in a guy who pitched 7 innings.
And I'm willing to bet, I have never checked the stats, but the Marichal game, I bet they pitched it next rotation.
They had somebody put the pitches out of that game. The anniversary was a couple of weeks ago, and Spahn had pitched from 201 pitches, and Marichal 227, I think the number was.
Yeah,
that'll never be close again to that.
And you know, there's an anecdote about that game that the manager of the Giants went over to Marichal when it stretched into the 12th or 13th inning. Went over to Marichal and said, "You want to come out?" And Marichal said, "As long as that old goat is pitching, I'm pitching," meaning Spahn.
Yeah, right. I was going to say Spahn was no youngster either.
Yeah, Spahn said, "As long as that kid is in there, I'm going to." Yeah, it's only Marichal's second, third, or fourth year. As long as that kid is in there, I'm staying in.
One of, to me, Warren Spahn rates as the greatest pitcher and the greatest baseball player in modern history. Why? He fought in the Battle of the Bulge during World War II and then came home and won 363 games, more wins than any left-handed pitcher in the history of our game. That's pretty damn impressive to me.
Yep.
A guy who fought in World War II at the Battle of the Bulge.
Yeah, he was once asked if he was afraid in a baseball game. He said, "I fought in the Battle of the Bulge. No baseball game is going to make me. Is going to scare me."
Of course, absolutely. That's
I agree with those comments that you guys made about Spahn. No question. Great pitcher, but he did have that war background, and the fact is that he did fight in Europe, and he should be recognized that all those wins he got, as Hal mentioned, were after he served.
Yeah, and his career was got 363 wins and 382 complete games.
Right. Yeah, back then that's what the starting pitchers were pitched. That's what they were paid to do, and they were expected to start and finish unless they were getting hit or they got hurt.
I'll tell you guys another story about the Battle of the Bulge. I was not in the Battle of the Bulge, by the way.
Yeah.
I was a rookie baseball writer covering a Yankees game, and I called my office to ask if there were any special instructions, that anybody needed anything. And I was told that the Springfield, Massachusetts member newspaper wanted to know from Ralph Houck, who had just taken over the team, how come the Yankees were not playing very well under Houck. Unfortunately, the dynasty had ended, and the Yankees were trailing everybody. And Houck had come down from the front office to try and rescue them. And so I was told, find out from Houck why he can't get that team straightened out. Well, it's a loaded question, obviously, but I do what I'm told. I'm 25 years old, and I want to do this for a living, So I went into Houck's office after the game, and all the other writers were there, Dick Young and Maury Allen and all the regular writers, and I let them do their thing, get their questions answered, and they were all finished, and I'm still there. And he looks at me. He doesn't know who I am. I'm just a face in the crowd. And I tried to explain to him. I said, Ralph, I wanted you to know that I'm not asking this for me. I'm asking it for a member newspaper. I'm with the AP, and here's the question. And I asked him this question. Now, Ralph Houck was not a softie. He was a tough guy. And he had fought at the Battle of the Bulge alongside Warren Spahn, I suppose. And I asked this question. Houck jumped up, and right in my face, he's got his cigar in his mouth. He's in my face, and he said, what kind of question is that? Although he threw a few F-bombs in there as well. And he chased me out of his office. And I'm thinking, I'm a dead man. This guy fought in the Battle of the Bulge. He's going to break me in half. Well, he didn't. And the next night on the field at batting practice, he came up to me and he said, I'm sorry about last night, kid. And I thought, when he came up to me, I thought, this is the end of it. Now he's going to kill me. Anyway, that's my Battle of the Bulge story.
There was also
I think, Hal, if I'm not mistaken, Houck's nickname was Major.
The Major, right?
He was a Major.
Yeah. Right.
He was a Major. That's right.
Yeah.
There was a story I read in several places that after 1955, a season ended. The Yankees went over to Japan for a series of games, and somehow the State Department arranged them to the team to meet one of the big Japanese honchos, not the emperor, but one of the big politicians there. So they go to this, and the politician asked the Yankees. They had been to the Far East before. Up goes Hank Bauer's hand, and he starts reciting all the islands that he fought on when he was in the Marines during World War II. And the Japanese guy turned green, and the meeting ended.
That's pretty funny. I think we should end tonight. Alan mentioned this before the program started. We should discuss also this epic championship match at Wimbledon between Roger Federer and Djokovic, which set all kinds of records. Alan, you ought to talk about that.
Yeah, I've become a big tennis fan over the years because it's basically a match. It's a one-on-one. Okay, and over the last several years, and it's still ongoing, the big three, which consist of Federer, Djokovic, and Nadal, win everything. It's very rare that some outsider comes in. So Djokovic and Federer played Sunday in Wimbledon, and most of the crowd was voting for Federer, who's going to be 38 next month. And the fifth set went extra, and Federer broke Djokovic in the 15th game to go ahead 18-7, 8 games to 8-7. So he's serving the match out, and Djokovic saved 2 match points in the next game, tied 8-8, and they put in a new rule this year there that if it's 12-12, they play a tiebreaker. It used to be that they would go on forever until somebody won by 2. And Djokovic outlasted Federer. The match took 5 hours. And I've never seen a match with two competitors was so incredibly mentally tough. And Djokovic said this a number of times in the interview. He said, I became very good when I learned how to forget what happened before.
Well, you know what, Alan? I played tennis, and I can only tell you from experience. I mean, I was just an average kind of guy playing tennis, but the stamina and the toughness of those players, you know, both the men and the women. I mean, when they're playing those 5-set or 3-set tiebreakers, and those, you know, they're out there for 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours in the heat. I mean, it's amazing what they do. And incredible talent, and I missed that game match. I wished I had seen it, but I certainly read about it. And you're right; it had to be an incredible thing to watch because those two guys went at each other, and neither one of them were going to give in. And you know, it went to that length. It's tremendous.
But that's the whole thing is that and Halep, the woman that beat Serena Williams Saturday, said, you know, she finally learned that you had to not dwell on what happened before. And you play every point like it was your last.
Right.
And this is what these guys do.
I'll tell you this. I know Serena has not won a major in a while, but this woman, to me, is the greatest woman athlete that we've ever seen. She had a terrible childbirth, nearly died in childbirth, and came back and has been in the finals for a couple of tournaments, a couple of Grand Slam tournaments. And she's just a remarkable player. She's not a young kid anymore, and yet there she is in the championship round. And I find her accomplishments to be remarkable. I really do.
And basically, the top players tend to be very class acts, because the ones who show temper and all the rest of this, usually when it comes to the real big, you know, the semifinals and finals, you don't find them anywhere, especially with the men.
McEnroe got pretty far.
Well, if they had the technology, what McEnroe was playing that they have today, where they review all these close calls, McEnroe would have been a lot calmer. Half the time most of the time when he disagreed with the call of the shot, and they didn't have a replay or a review in those days. It would have calmed down him and Jimmy Connors quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, they did. Those guys were very vocal on the court. I mean,
they sure were.
In the past, I mean, tennis had been a gentlemanly or womanly, quiet game. I think Serena started, when she was there, last year, she got into a big argument. But
and she apologized.
Right, she apologized. But McEnroe and Connors, I mean, they would storm around, and McEnroe in particular, I mean, he was berating everybody. And, great talent. but he didn't keep his emotions to himself. He let everybody know about it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. He does color commentary on these tournaments with his nice, calm voice.
He's terrific. He's a terrific commentator.
Yes, he is.
And so on the women's side is Chris Evert.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yep.
They offer great insight, and as a tennis writer, and I wrote some tennis in my career, I always used to listen to them because they offered a great deal of insight into the match and into the players. So I always appreciated that. And I'll tell you one more story, and then we can end this, about John McEnroe. One night, he's playing the last match of the night at the U.S. Open. Starts the match at, 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, and they play five sets, I guess, or four sets. And it just went on forever. And now it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and everybody wants to go home. And I had written my story, but I wanted to see the end. And the players are required to go into the interview room or else they get fined. And no writer was going into the interview room because of the hour. We were on deadline. Everybody's on deadline except yours truly. So I thought, well, I'm going to take the bullet for the tennis writers. And I went down to the interview room, and it was Johnny Mac and me in the interview room. And I thought, okay, I'm going to ask you one question, John, and whatever question I asked him, I don't know. And he answered the question. I said, okay, let's go home. We both left.
Yeah, so basically because
I always appreciated McEnroe for, he did what he had to do. He followed the rules. You got to be in the interview room at 2 o'clock in the morning. You'll be in the interview room.
The U.S. Open is the only one of the majors that has night sessions.
Yes, that's
because
true.
They want to squeeze the last drop out of you.
Follow the money.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay, guys, this has been fun.
Yes, another enjoyable evening with the gang.
Yes, sir.
Good topics, David. Well done.
Okay.
Alan and Hal always have some very good insights, and apart from what we all love, baseball, it's nice of us to be able to talk about some of the other sports as well.
Right.
And my last piece of advice for you guys is if you run into anybody who has fought at the Battle of the Bulge, don't offend them in any way because it could be dangerous.
Yes. He won't be able to chase you
next week.
Okay, take care.
Okay. Take care, everybody.
Yep. Bye-bye, everybody.